The Duchess's Deadly Secret, a Hercule Poirot mystery. Chapter 1. The Guests of Ashcombe Hall. The October mist lay heavy over the beech avenue that led to Ashcombe Hall, softening the grey stone of the house into something almost dreamlike, as though the building itself were reluctant to declare its true shape to the world. It was, Hercule Poirot would later reflect, a fitting introduction to a household that spent a great deal of its energy concealing what lay beneath a very handsome surface. But on the evening of the 23rd of October, Poirot was not yet at Ashcombe Hall, and the mist concerned only the motor car in which Colonel Rupert Ashby sat, drumming his fingers against his knee with the particular restlessness of a man who owes money he cannot pay. "You're very quiet, Rupert," said his sister, Beatrice, Dowager Duchess of Wrentham, from the opposite seat. She was a handsome woman of 60, upright as a general, with silver hair dressed in the old style, and eyes the pale, assessing blue of a woman who had spent 4 decades managing a great house and, latterly, a great fortune. "One might almost think you had something on your conscience." "Nothing of the sort," said the Colonel, too quickly. "Merely thinking of the guest list. Bit of a crowd for your birthday, isn't it? And that fellow Blackwood, I still don't see why Edmund asked him." "Dennis Blackwood is an old friend of mine," said the Duchess, in a tone that closed the subject as effectively as a slammed door. "And it is my birthday, and my house, and I shall invite whom I please." The motor car swept up the drive, and within the hour, Ashcombe Hall had begun to fill with the particular hum of a country house preparing for a celebration. Footmen carrying trunks up the wide staircase, the housekeeper, Mrs. Agnes Whitfield, moving through the corridors with the brisk authority of a woman who had run the household for 22 years and intended to run it for 22 more. And in the drawing-room, before the fire, the young Duke of Wrentham stood, with his arm about the waist of a slender, dark-haired girl, whose smile did not quite reach her eyes. "You look nervous, Cynthia," said Edmund, laughing, though there was an edge beneath the laugh. "Mother doesn't bite, not often, at any rate." "It isn't your mother I'm nervous of," said Cynthia Marsh, and then, seeing his face, added quickly, "I only mean, so many people, all watching me, deciding whether I'm good enough for you." "You're good enough for 10 of me," said Edmund, and kissed her, and did not see, in the doorway, the small, still figure of Eleanor Voss, who had come to announce that tea was laid, and who withdrew again without a word. Eleanor Voss had been the Duchess's companion and secretary for 6 years. She was 28, quiet, precise in her habits, with a way of entering and leaving a room so unobtrusively that the family had come to regard her almost as part of the furniture, a mistake, as it happened, that more than one person in that house would come to regret. In the library, meanwhile, Mr. Percival Gray, the family solicitor, sat with a leather document case open upon his knees, and did not look up when the door opened. "Ah, Doctor," he said, without turning. "Come to check on Her Grace's heart, I suppose. You'll find it functioning admirably. She scolded me for a full 10 minutes this morning about a clause in her will." Dr. Julian Hartley closed the door behind him with exaggerated care. He was a lean, fair man of perhaps 45, handsome in a worn sort of way, and at present his hands, Gray noticed, were not quite steady. "Percival," he said, "I need to speak with you about the trust." "The trust," repeated Gray, and something in his voice changed. "What about it?" "I think," said Hartley, very low, "that she knows." Gray set down his pen. For a long moment neither man spoke, and the fire cracked and settled in the grate, and somewhere above them, in the long gallery, a housemaid could be heard laughing at some joke of the second footman's, cheerfully unaware that in the library below 2 men had just discovered that they shared a secret capable of destroying them both. By the time the dressing gong sounded, all 12 members of the house party, for it was, in the end, a company of 12, counting family, guests, and the mysterious Captain Blackwood, who had arrived last of all in a hired car and tipped the chauffeur with a curious, watchful smile, had assembled beneath the roof of Ashcombe Hall. None of them, dressing for dinner in the amber light of their separate rooms, could have said with certainty what the evening held. But Mrs. Whitfield, polishing the silver in the butler's pantry, with old Simmons the butler beside her, paused in her work and said, apropos of nothing, "I don't like it, Mr. Simmons. All these people, and half of them not speaking to the other half if they can help it. There's a storm coming to this house. I can feel it in my bones." Simmons, who had served the Wrentham family for 30 years and had learned long ago not to argue with Mrs. Whitfield's bones, merely grunted and continued polishing the fish knives, though he privately thought that for once she might very well be right. Above stairs, the last of the guests were settling into their rooms. Captain Dennis Blackwood, standing at the window of the blue guest chamber, with a glass of the Duchess's excellent sherry already in hand, watched the mist thicken over the parkland and permitted himself a small, private smile of satisfaction, the smile of a man who has, after long and patient cultivation, finally arrived at the moment of harvest. He had been coming to Ashcombe Hall, on and off, for the better part of 2 decades, and he flattered himself that he understood its rhythms rather better than most of the family did themselves. The quiet corridors after 11 o'clock, the still-room key upon its accustomed hook, the particular hour at which the household, exhausted by the day's small dramas, finally surrendered itself to sleep. Down the corridor, in a room considerably smaller and considerably less well appointed than the captain's, Eleanor Voss sat before her looking-glass, brushing out her dark hair with slow, mechanical strokes, and thinking, as she thought every evening at this hour, of the letter unfinished upon her writing desk. Before we continue, a quick message for every mystery lover. If you're enjoying this story, you'll love the Baker Street Library, my collection of exclusive detective mystery ebooks available only in ebook format. Download instantly and enjoy your next investigation anytime. You'll find the link in the description, the pinned comment, and the channel description. Now, let's get back to the mystery, and of the conversation she had promised herself, for 6 years running, that she would finally have the courage to begin. Tonight, she told herself. Perhaps tonight, after the birthday toasts were drunk and the guests had gone up to bed, she would knock upon the Duchess's door and say the words plainly at last. She did not yet know how very little time remained to her to make good on that resolution. It was Mrs. Whitfield, making her final round of the corridors before retiring, who paused outside the still-room door that night and frowned, quite without knowing why, at the ordinary sight of the key hanging undisturbed upon its hook, a small, unremarkable detail that would return to her 3 days later with a significance she could not then have begun to guess. Chapter 2. A Toast Turned to Ash. Dinner at Ashcombe Hall was, by long tradition, a formal affair, and the birthday dinner of the Dowager Duchess was more formal still. The long table gleamed with silver and candlelight. The family portraits looked down from the walls with the faint, painted disapproval of ancestors who had never quite approved of anything, and the Duchess herself sat at the head of the table in a gown of deep blue, radiant with the particular satisfaction of a woman who believes, wrongly, that she has arranged her family's affairs exactly as she wishes them arranged. "To my mother," said Edmund, rising with his glass, "on her 60th birthday, and to Cynthia, who has done me the very great honour of agreeing to become my wife." There was a general murmur of approval, the clink of glasses, and beneath the table, unseen, Cynthia Marsh's hand tightened on her napkin until the knuckles whitened. "A toast," said Colonel Ashby heartily, though his eyes did not quite meet his sister's, "to the 2 happiest people in Kent." "Very prettily said, Rupert," observed the Duchess, "though I notice you have not yet paid me back the £200 I lent you in the spring." A silence fell, brief but complete, the kind of silence that falls in a room where everyone has heard something they were not meant to hear and is now determined to pretend they have not. Colonel Ashby's face went a dull, unpleasant red. "Beatrice, really, "I am only teasing, my dear," said the Duchess, though her smile suggested otherwise. "Percival, you have my new will ready for signing tomorrow, have you not? I have decided upon a change or two." Mr. Gray, at the far end of the table, set down his fork with exaggerated care. "Whenever it suits your grace." "Good. There are one or two provisions I wish altered." Her gaze travelled, very briefly, to Eleanor Voss, who sat in her customary place below the salt, eyes fixed upon her plate. "One or two matters I have neglected for far too long." Captain Dennis Blackwood, seated near the Duchess, leaned forward with an air of pleasant interest that did not entirely mask something sharper beneath. "How intriguing, Beatrice, a woman of surprises, even at 60. "I have always had my secrets, Dennis," said the Duchess, "as I think have you." It was said lightly, as a joke among old friends, and the table laughed, and the moment passed. But Dr. Hartley, across the table, found that his hand had gone quite cold around the stem of his wine-glass, and Percival Gray did not look up from his plate again for the remainder of the meal. After dinner the ladies withdrew, and it was there, in the drawing-room, over coffee, that the Duchess complained for the first time of a headache and a curious bitterness in her mouth. "It is nothing," she said, waving away Cynthia's concern. "I shall take my tonic and go up early. Eleanor, would you fetch it? You know where Dr. Hartley keeps the fresh bottle." Eleanor rose without a word and left the room. She returned some minutes later with a small brown bottle and a glass of water, and the Duchess, still talking, something about the arrangements for tomorrow's shooting party, took the dose without looking at it, as she had taken it every night for the past 18 months, ever since Dr. Hartley had diagnosed the irregularity in her heart. "Bitter as ever," she said, making a small face, and set down the glass. "Go on up, Eleanor. I shan't need you further tonight. I mean to sit a little longer with my guests." It was the last coherent sentence the Duchess of Wrentham ever spoke. She died at 11 minutes past 11 o'clock, in her own bed, with Mrs. Whitfield beside her, and Dr. Hartley summoned too late to do anything but confirm what the housekeeper's screaming had already announced to the entire household, that Beatrice, Dowager Duchess of Wrentham, was dead, her heart, by every outward appearance, finally and fatally failed. "A tragedy," said Dr. Hartley, some 20 minutes later, to the pale and shaken company gathered in the hall, "but not, I confess, entirely unexpected. I had warned her Grace repeatedly of the strain upon her heart. I shall, of course, sign the certificate myself, unless anyone objects." No one objected. It was Mr. Percival Gray, standing very still by the fireplace with his face the colour of old parchment, who observed, to no one in particular, and in a voice so quiet that only Eleanor Voss, nearest him, heard it at all, how very convenient. Eleanor turned to look at him, but Gray had already moved away, and it was not until 3 days later, when a small, extraordinary man with an enormous moustache arrived at Ashcombe Hall in answer to a letter the Duchess herself had posted the week before her death, that anyone thought to ask what the solicitor had meant. Chapter 3. The Little Belgian Arrives. The letter had been written on the Duchess's own crested paper, in her own decisive hand, and it had reached Hercule Poirot's flat in London 4 days before her death, a fact which, once he learned of it, struck Poirot as being of very considerable significance indeed. "Dear M. Poirot," it read, "I am given to understand by my solicitor, who once had occasion to consult you regarding a matter of forged securities, that you possess both discretion and remarkable powers of observation. I write to you now because I have reason to believe that certain persons within my own household are not what they represent themselves to be, and I should value very much the opinion of a disinterested party before I take steps that cannot be undone. I would be obliged if you could call upon me at Ashcombe Hall at your earliest convenience. The matter, I assure you, is a delicate one, and I would prefer it were not discussed with the local police, who are, I am sure, excellent men, but not, if you will forgive me, subtle ones. Yours very truly, Beatrice Wrentham Poirot, had intended to travel down to Kent within the week. He had not intended to arrive to find the local police already in residence, a body already interred in the family vault with unseemly haste, and a death certificate already signed, sealed, and filed as natural causes, cardiac failure. "You understand my difficulty, Monsieur Poirot," said Inspector Colin Reeve, a sensible, square-built man who had the good grace to look faintly embarrassed by the whole business. "The lady's dead and buried before that letter of hers ever reached you, and her own doctor signed the certificate without a murmur. If it weren't for young Lord Wrentham insisting we look into it, on the strength of finding your letter among his mother's papers, I don't know that we'd have looked twice." "But you are looking twice now," said Poirot, seating himself with great precision upon the edge of a chair in the estate office, his small, neat hands folded upon the head of his cane. "And what, mon ami, have you found?" Reeve consulted his notebook. "Not much, if I'm honest. The doctor's certificate says cardiac failure consistent with her known condition. No obvious sign of violence. She'd taken her usual tonic, digitalis, in small doses, for the heart, same as she'd taken every night for a year and a half. Bottle's been tested. Nothing wrong with it that shouldn't be there." "And yet," said Poirot softly, "the Duchess wrote to me, 4 days before her death, that certain persons in her household were not what they represented themselves to be. And Mr. Percival Gray, the family solicitor, was heard to remark, upon viewing the body, that the death was very convenient. These are not the observations, Inspector, of a household entirely at peace with its own conscience." "You think it's murder, then?" "I think," said Poirot, rising and moving to the window, from which he could see the long beech avenue, and, beyond it, the misted parkland of Ashcombe Hall stretching away toward a grey October horizon, "that I have not yet formed an opinion. But I observe, Inspector, that a very great many people in this house appear to have had a very great deal to gain from the Duchess's silence, or to lose from her speech. And I observe further that a woman who intended to change her will, who suspected persons in her own household of deception, and who died on the very eve of putting those suspicions into words to a stranger of proven discretion, such a woman does not die of a convenient heart failure. Not in my experience, and my experience, Inspector, is not inconsiderable." He turned from the window, and his green eyes, usually so mild and so bright with a kind of amused intelligence, had gone hard and very still. "I should like," he said, "to speak with the family, all of them. And I should like it understood that I do not intend to leave Ashcombe Hall until I have discovered exactly what it was that Beatrice Wrentham wished to tell me, even if I must ask the questions she did not live to ask herself." Chapter 4. Questions among the portraits. Poirot conducted his interviews in the long gallery, beneath the painted eyes of 6 generations of Wrenthams, because, as he explained to the bewildered Inspector Reeve, a person who lies beneath the gaze of his ancestors is, I find, subtly less comfortable than a person who lies in an ordinary sitting room. It is a small advantage, but I have learned never to despise small advantages. Edmund, Duke of Wrentham, came first, pale and drawn, twisting his signet ring about his finger as he spoke. "I don't understand it, Monsieur Poirot. Mother was in perfect spirits at dinner. A little headache, that's all, and Dr. Hartley had been treating her heart for months. Everyone knew she might go at any time, the strain of it. Why would anyone want to kill her? That, monsieur, is precisely the question I intend to answer. Tell me, you knew that your mother intended to write to me. I knew she'd been troubled about something these last weeks. She wouldn't say what. I found your letter in her desk after, and I thought, well, if she trusted you enough to write, perhaps I should trust you too." He hesitated. "There's something else. She told Gray she meant to alter her will. I don't know what changes she intended. I didn't ask. I suppose that sounds strange. It sounds, monsieur, like a young man in love, with a wedding to plan and very little curiosity for legal papers. Tell me, instead of Captain Blackwood, your mother's friend, I understand." Yet I detect no great warmth toward him in this house. Edmund's mouth tightened. Blackwood's a leech. Always has been, from what I gather. Knew mother years ago, before she married my father, and's turned up every few years since asking for a little help, as he calls it. I never understood why she tolerated him. And Miss Marsh, your fiancée, how did your mother regard her? Coolly at first. She came round, or I thought she had. A shadow crossed his face. Actually, mother said something odd to me the day before she died. Asked whether I was quite certain of Cynthia's family, her background. I told her it didn't matter to me. She said it might matter a great deal, and left it at that. Poirot's eyes sharpened with interest, though his voice remained mild as milk. Merci, monsieur. That is most helpful. Cynthia Marsh, when she came, was composed, but her composure had the brittle quality of ice on a pond too thin to bear weight. I loved Edmund's mother would be too strong, she said carefully, in answer to Poirot's gentle probing. I respected her. I think, in time, she might have come to accept me. Accept you, mademoiselle? You speak as though there were something to forgive. A pause, fractionally too long. Every mother has doubts about the woman her son chooses. That's all I meant. I think, said Poirot gently, that is not quite all you meant. But I am a patient man, mademoiselle. I can wait. She left the gallery rather more quickly than she had entered it, and Poirot, watching her go, permitted himself a small, satisfied smile. The smile Inspector Reeve was beginning to recognize of a man who had just observed a very interesting crack in a very carefully constructed wall. Mrs. Whitfield came next, brisk and businesslike even in her grief, and answered every question with the plain, unadorned frankness of a woman who had spent 22 years running a great household and had long since lost patience with anything resembling evasion. I loved that woman, monsieur. Poirot, whatever else you may hear said of her in this house. Hard, some called her, and perhaps she was, but she was never unkind to me, not once in 22 years, and I'll not have anyone say otherwise in my hearing. Who in this house, madame, would you say had the least love for her? Mrs. Whitfield considered the question with evident seriousness, as though it deserved the same careful weighing she might give to a difficult menu or a delicate matter of household precedence. Love's a strange word for a house like this one, M. Poirot. There's them that loved her true, and them that merely needed her, which isn't the same thing at all, whatever the poets say. I'd not like to name names on so short an acquaintance with the truth of it, but I'll tell you this for nothing. A house doesn't grow secrets the way this one has, these past weeks, without something rotten sitting at the root of it. I've kept this house 40 years, counting my time as a girl in the kitchens, and I've never known so many closed doors and hushed voices as I have this past month. You have been most helpful, madame, said Poirot, and meant it entirely. Chapter 5. The Solicitor's Unease. Mr. Percival Gray was, by profession and by temperament, a careful man, and it was precisely this carefulness that first drew Poirot's close attention when the solicitor took his seat in the long gallery, arranging his coat-tails with the fussy precision of a man determined to appear entirely at his ease. A dreadful business, Miss Poirot, dreadful. I have served this family since I was a young man articled to my father's firm. I drew up Her Grace's marriage settlement, if you can credit it, and now I find myself drawing up the papers for her funeral instead. Time is a cruel instrument. You knew her a very long while then, monsieur. Tell me, what manner of woman was she, truly, beneath the Duchess's formal manner? Gray considered the question with evident care. Shrewd, generous, in her way, though she liked the world to believe her harder than she was. She kept a great many confidences over the years, family scandals, financial embarrassments, the ordinary sins of an ordinary great house, and she was, on the whole, remarkably discreet about them, provided one did not test her patience too far. She had grown, these past weeks, unusually preoccupied. I put it down, foolishly, to the excitement of Lord Wrentham's engagement. And the new will she intended to sign. You drew up the provisions yourself. I had begun the preliminary draft, yes, though Her Grace had not yet given me her final instructions regarding certain particulars. She was most insistent that the matter be handled with absolute discretion, even from myself, until she had fully made up her mind. Gray's hands, Poirot noted, had grown very still upon his knee, the stillness of a man exercising considerable self-control. I confess I do not know what changes she ultimately intended. You are quite certain of that, monsieur? Quite certain, Monsieur Poirot. The answer came a fraction too quickly, and Poirot, who had built a long and distinguished career upon the noticing of such fractions, filed the observation away with the same meticulous care he applied to every other fact in this increasingly tangled affair. One further question, monsieur, and I ask it only from an abundance of caution. Where were you upon the night of Her Grace's death, between the hour of dinner's end and the hour her death was discovered? In the library, working upon papers, said Gray, and this time there was no hesitation at all, which struck Poirot, oddly, as more suspicious than any hesitation could have been. I remained there the whole evening, quite alone, until Mrs. Whitfield's cries summoned the entire household. Entirely alone, monsieur? No servant passed through, no footman brought you coffee, nothing at all to confirm the hour of your solitude. Entirely alone, Gray repeated, and rose rather abruptly to take his leave, murmuring something about urgent correspondence that could not wait, leaving Poirot to gaze thoughtfully after him, turning over in his mind the curious fact that an alibi offered with such flat, unadorned certainty was very often, in his considerable experience, no alibi at all. Chapter 6. The Physician's Composure. Dr. Julian Hartley's first interview with Poirot, conducted that same afternoon in the small morning room overlooking the rose garden, was a masterclass, Poirot privately reflected, in the particular calm that only a man of medicine could summon at will, the calm of one long accustomed to delivering difficult news to frightened patients, without allowing his own feelings to trouble the surface. You will forgive me, Monsieur Poirot, if I seem less distressed than the occasion perhaps warrants, Hartley said, seating himself with easy, professional composure. 20 years of medicine teaches a man to set his grief aside until the practical matters are attended to. I have signed a great many death certificates in my career. I did not expect to sign this one. You attended Her Grace for how long, Doctor? 18 months for the heart condition specifically. An irregularity I diagnosed myself, quite by chance, during a routine examination. Before that, of course, I had attended the family generally for the better part of 2 decades. I brought young Lord Wrentham into this world with my own hands, M. Poirot. I do not say that to excuse myself from suspicion, which I understand must fall upon me as her physician, but only so that you understand the very great affection in which I held this family. A physician's affection for his patients does not, alas, always preclude other complications, Doctor. Tell me of the tonic, the dosage, the preparation, the manner in which it was administered. Hartley described the preparation with the fluent, unhesitating precision of a man reciting a lesson learned by heart. A standard tincture of digitalis, carefully measured, prepared fortnightly in the still room, the dosage recorded meticulously in his own private ledger. The margin between an effective dose and a dangerous one is, I confess, distressingly narrow with digitalis, M. Poirot. It is precisely why I insisted on preparing it myself, rather than trusting a chemist's assistant to measure it correctly. I would not have entrusted such a delicate matter to careless hands. And yet, Doctor, careless hands, or careful ones, perhaps I should say, appear to have altered that dosage over recent weeks, without your knowledge. So Mrs. Whitfield believes, said Hartley, and for the first time a flicker of something, irritation or perhaps unease, crossed his composed features. I confess I find the notion difficult to credit. My records show no variance whatsoever across the entire period of treatment. I would stake my professional reputation upon their accuracy. You may yet be required to do precisely that, Doctor, said Poirot mildly, and watched with interest as Hartley's composure, so carefully maintained throughout the interview, wavered for just a moment before reasserting itself entirely. Where were you, might I ask, upon the night of Her Grace's death, between the conclusion of dinner and the hour her death was discovered? In the billiard room, Monsieur Poirot, with Colonel Ashby and Captain Blackwood, engaged in a thoroughly unremarkable game of snooker, until Mrs. Whitfield's screams summoned us all. I was, I regret to say, 4 minutes too late to be of any use whatsoever when I reached her bedside. 4 minutes, M. Poirot. I have turned that small interval over in my mind 100 times since, wondering whether 4 minutes might have made the difference between a physician's failure and a physician's triumph. I do not think it would have. The damage, once digitalis toxicity reaches a certain threshold, is very rarely reversible, but a doctor's conscience, M. Poirot, does not always yield to a doctor's reason. It was, Poirot reflected afterward, a most affecting speech, delivered with every appearance of genuine and professional regret, and it was not until several days later, when the full truth of the matter finally emerged, that he came to understand precisely how much genuine regret and how much carefully rehearsed performance that composed and sorrowful account had truly contained. Chapter 7. The Colonel's Confession. Colonel Rupert Ashby entered the long gallery like a man walking into a court-martial, and sat down heavily in the chair opposite Poirot, without waiting to be asked. "I suppose you've heard I owed my sister money," he said, before Poirot could speak at all. "Might as well get it out in the open. £200 and a bit more besides that she didn't mention at dinner. God rest her. Gambling debts. Cards, mostly, and a horse or two that didn't run as well as I'd hoped. That is very frank of you, Colonel. No sense being anything else, is there? You'll find out regardless. Man like you. Yes, I owed her money, and yes, her death cancels the debt, since I don't suppose Edmund means to dun his own uncle for it. So there's my motive, laid out plain as you like. Might as well arrest me now, and save us both the trouble." Poirot regarded him with mild, unhurried interest. "You are very eager, monsieur, to confess to a motive. I wonder if it is because you believe it will distract me from asking about something else." The Colonel's bluster faltered, very slightly. "Don't know what you mean." "I mean, monsieur, that a man who volunteers his sins so readily and so loudly is very often a man anxious that a smaller, quieter sin should pass unnoticed in the noise. Where were you, Colonel, between 10:30 and 11 o'clock on the night your sister died?" "In the billiard room, with Blackwood, as it happens, playing a wretched game of snooker, if you want the truth, and losing badly. The entire time, a hesitation, brief but unmistakable. I stepped out for perhaps 10 minutes, went up to my room for cigarettes, left my case there after dinner. Passed nobody of consequence. You may ask Blackwood. He'll confirm the whole business, I'm sure, minus the 10 minutes I wasn't there to be watched." "And did your route to your room," said Poirot, very softly, "take you anywhere near your sister's chamber?" The Colonel's face, already ruddy, went a shade darker still. "It's the same corridor, yes, if that's what you're driving at. But I never went in, never saw her, never touched that cursed tonic of hers. I'll swear to that on anything you like. I do not yet ask you to swear, monsieur. I ask you only to remember. It is remarkable," Poirot added, half to himself, as the Colonel took his leave with rather more haste than dignity, "how a man may confess loudly to being a debtor and yet fall silent, all at once, upon the question of a corridor and 10 unaccounted minutes. Le pauvre colonel wishes very much for me to believe him merely weak. I wonder if he is not, perhaps, also afraid." Inspector Reeve, who had been taking notes in the corner, with the air of a man increasingly out of his depth, looked up. "You think he did it, then?" The Colonel? I think, Inspector, that the Colonel is exactly the sort of suspect a clever murderer would be delighted to have in a house party, loud, indebted, and conveniently unaccounted for during 10 crucial minutes. Whether he is guilty of murder or merely guilty of being useful to somebody else's purposes, I cannot yet say, but I have learned, in a long career, to distrust most of all the suspect who makes my work appear easy. Murder, mes amis, is very rarely so obliging. Chapter 8. The Bitter Taste of Truth. It was Mrs. Whitfield of all the household who gave Poirot his first clue of real substance, and she gave it not in answer to a question, but in the course of an entirely unrelated complaint about the difficulty of keeping good scullery maids in the modern age. And I said to her Grace, only the week before she died, I said, "Your Grace, that tonic tastes wrong to me, bitterer than it ought." And she laughed, and said Dr. Hartley had told her a stronger dose might be needed as her heart grew weaker, and who was I to argue with a doctor? But I didn't like it, Monsieur. Poirot, I'll tell you that for nothing. Bitter as gall, the last week or two, when before it had only ever been a little sharp. Poirot, who had been listening with the particular stillness he reserved for moments of genuine significance, set down his coffee cup with exaggerated care. "You are certain of this, madame?" The tonic had changed in taste, had grown more bitter in the final weeks of her Grace's life. "Certain as I'm sitting here. I've smelled that bottle 100 times, fetching it of an evening when Miss Voss was occupied elsewhere. There's a particular smell to digitalis, bitter, almondy, if you take my meaning, and it had grown stronger these past weeks. I did wonder, but it wasn't my place to question the doctor's orders, was it?" "No," said Poirot slowly, "it was not your place, but it is very much mine. Tell me, madame, who besides yourself and Miss Voss had access to that bottle?" Mrs. Whitfield considered. "The doctor himself, of course. He kept a fresh supply in the still-room cabinet, made it up himself each fortnight, very particular about it, said the dosage had to be exact for a heart in her condition. Miss Voss fetched it most evenings. I fetched it when she was busy, and I suppose anyone might have got at the still-room cabinet who knew where the key was kept, on the hook by the kitchen door, same as it's always been. No great secret in a house like this." "So," said Poirot, ticking the possibilities off upon his fingers with evident satisfaction, "we have a medicine growing steadily more bitter over some weeks. Not, I think, the natural progression of a prescribed dosage, which a careful physician would increase gradually and note carefully in his records, but something else entirely. We have a cabinet accessible, in principle, to a very great number of people, and we have a physician who prepared the tonic himself, and who was, I have confirmed this with Inspector Reeve, conveniently occupied in the billiard-room with Colonel Ashby and Captain Blackwood at the hour his patient was dying, and who arrived, by his own account, some 4 minutes after Mrs. Whitfield's screams first summoned the household. "You think the doctor poisoned her, then?" Mrs. Whitfield's hand went to her throat. "Dr. Hartley? But he's attended this family 20 years, M. Poirot. He brought Master Edmund into the world himself. I think nothing yet, madame, beyond this, that a medicine growing steadily and unaccountably more bitter is not the mark of an accident, nor of a natural progression of illness. It is the mark of intention. Somebody, over a period of weeks, was increasing the concentration of digitalis in that bottle, a slow poisoning, patient and careful, designed to look, in the end, precisely like what it did look like, the sad but unsurprising failure of an aging heart. It is," he added, almost admiringly, "a very clever method. Cleverer, I think, than our colonel or our captain would readily conceive. It required medical knowledge, monsieur. It required access, and it required, above all, patience. The patience of someone with a very great deal at stake, and every reason to make quite certain that no doctor, examining the body, would think to look twice." Inspector Reeve let out a low whistle. That points rather squarely at Hartley himself, doesn't it? It points, said Poirot, rising and moving to the window with his hands clasped behind his back, at anyone with access to that cabinet, a working knowledge of digitalis, and a motive strong enough to poison a woman slowly, over weeks, rather than swiftly, in a single night. It points, in other words, Inspector, at a much smaller circle than you might suppose, and I do not think, even now, that Dr. Hartley is quite so obviously guilty as the facts would have us believe. A clever murderer does not leave his fingerprints, so to speak, upon the very bottle that will be tested. No, I think we must look also at who else in this house possessed the knowledge, and more particularly, mes amis, at who else possessed the motive to want Beatrice Wrentham silenced before she could speak the secrets she had promised, in her letter to me, that she intended very soon to tell. Chapter 9. Secrets in the Rose Garden. Poirot found Cynthia Marsh alone in the walled rose garden the following morning, sitting upon a stone bench with her coat drawn tight against the autumn chill, staring at nothing in particular. "You will catch a cold, mademoiselle, sitting out here in such weather," he observed, settling himself beside her with the careful precision of a man mindful of his good trousers. "But I think perhaps you prefer the cold outside to the warmth within, just at present." "You're very perceptive, Monsieur Poirot. It is my trade. Tell me, mademoiselle, what was it the Duchess suspected about your family, your background, that troubled her so in the final days of her life?" Cynthia's hands tightened in her lap. For a long moment she said nothing, and Poirot, who understood the value of silence as well as any man alive, said nothing either, and waited. "My father was not who I told Edmund he was," she said at last, very low. I told everyone, that my father was a solicitor in Bristol, respectable, comfortably off, dead these 10 years. It isn't true. My father was Jack Marsh, the confidence man. Perhaps you've heard the name. He was tried twice, convicted once, for fraud. He died in prison when I was 16. I changed my situation as much as I could, took work as a governess, tried to build myself a life that had nothing to do with his. And then I met Edmund, and I loved him, and I was so afraid that if his family knew what I truly was, what my father had been, they would never let him marry me. And the Duchess discovered this. I don't know how, but yes, she called me to her sitting room 4 days before she died, and told me she had made inquiries. She didn't say how, or through whom, and that she knew the truth. I begged her not to tell Edmund. She said, Cynthia's voice caught. She said she would think on it, that she did not wish to ruin 2 young people's happiness over the sins of a father, but that she could not, in conscience, allow her son to marry under a falsehood either. She said she would decide what to do before the will was signed, and that I should have my answer within the week. And so you had, mademoiselle, a very powerful reason indeed to wish the Duchess silent before she could deliver her verdict. Cynthia turned to face him fully, and there were tears now, unashamed, upon her cheeks. I did not kill her, Monsieur Poirot. I loved her son, and I was terrified of her, and, yes, God forgive me, there were moments in that week when I wished she had never found out at all, but I did not put poison in her medicine. I don't even know what digitalis looks like. I've never so much as entered the still room in this house. That, said Poirot gently, is a claim easily tested, and I shall test it. But tell me one thing further, mademoiselle, and tell me truly, did you know of anyone else in this house with a secret to protect? For I begin to think that Ashcombe Hall conceals a very great many falsehoods beneath its handsome roof, and yours, I suspect, is not the darkest of them. Cynthia hesitated, and then said in a rush, as though the words had been waiting a long time to be spoken, Eleanor Voss. I don't know anything for certain, Mem Poirot, but I've watched her. The way she looks at portraits of the old Duke, the way the Duchess speaks to her sometimes, not like a companion, but like something more. And once, quite by accident, I saw a letter on Eleanor's writing desk, unfinished. that began, "My dearest mother," and it was not addressed to anyone Eleanor has ever claimed as family. Poirot's eyes grew very still. "Indeed," he said softly. "Indeed, mademoiselle. I think it is high time I spoke with Miss Voss myself." Chapter 10. The Ledger and the Lie. While Poirot walked the rose garden, Inspector Reeve, acting upon instructions delivered that morning with characteristic precision, had spent the better part of 2 hours in the estate's business room, going through the household and trust accounts with Mr. Percival Grey standing uneasily at his shoulder. "I don't see what you expect to find, Inspector," Grey said, for perhaps the 4th time. "The Wrentham Charitable Trust accounts are audited yearly, quite regularly, by an independent firm in London." "Funny thing about audits," said Reeve, not looking up from the ledger in his hands, "is they only catch what they're looking for. This trust, the money's for the almshouses in the village, that right? And Dr. Hartley's one of the trustees, along with yourself and the Duchess. That is correct. Then perhaps you can explain to me, Mr. Grey, why there's 4 separate withdrawals here over the past 18 months, each just under £200, small enough not to draw much notice, I'd wager, but they don't match a single almshouse repair or pension payment I can find recorded anywhere else in this ledger. Nearly £800, all told, gone somewhere it oughtn't to have gone." Grey said nothing. His face had taken on the grey, waxen quality of a man watching a structure he has spent a long time propping up finally begin to collapse. "I'll ask you again," said Reeve, not unkindly, "and I'd rather you told me the truth now than have Poirot draw it out of you later, because I promise you, Mr. Grey, he will draw it out, one way or another. Did you know about these withdrawals?" "I suspected," said Grey heavily, sinking into a chair. "I confronted Julian, Dr. Hartley, perhaps 3 months ago. He swore it was a temporary matter, a loan against his own inheritance, to be repaid within the year. He has a sister, you understand, in poor health, expensive treatments abroad. I believed him, God help me, because I wanted to believe him. We have been friends 20 years, and I did not report it, because to report it would have meant scandal for this family, for the trust, for everyone concerned, and because Julian swore, absolutely swore, that the Duchess would never need to know. But she found out anyway." Grey nodded miserably. 3 weeks ago. I don't know how. She had a way of finding things out, Beatrice, a network of correspondents and old friends and family solicitors who owed her favours going back decades. She summoned me and asked, quite directly, whether I had known of irregularities in the trust accounts. I could not lie to her, Inspector. I told her the truth, and I told her it concerned Julian, and I begged her to give him time to make restitution before she took any formal step. And what did she say to that? She said, Grey answered very quietly, that she would think on it, exactly as she said to Miss Marsh, exactly as she said, I believe, to a number of people in this house in those final weeks. She was gathering all her judgments together, Inspector, like a woman putting her affairs in order, deciding, one by one, whose secrets she would forgive and whose she would not, before she signed the new will and, I think, before she wrote to your M. Poirot for his opinion on how best to proceed. She never had the chance to decide. Someone made quite certain of that. There is one thing more, Inspector, Grey added, as Reeve gathered up the ledgers to take away with him. Something that has troubled me since her death, though I did not think it significant until this moment. When I told Beatrice of Julian's, of Dr. Hartley's difficulty, she did not seem entirely surprised. There was a weariness in her response, as though she had half expected some such disappointment for some time. She said to me, quite unprompted, "It is always the ones closest to us, Percival, who find the cruelest ways to ask for help." I did not understand her meaning then. I confess I understand it a good deal less now, given all that has since occurred. Reeve made a careful note of the remark, though its significance would not become clear to either man until several days later, when Poirot's investigation had progressed a good deal further toward its conclusion. When Poirot heard this account from Reeve that evening, He sat for a long while in silence, turning the information over with the meticulous care of a jeweller examining a stone for flaws. "So," he said at last, "Dr. Hartley had embezzled from a trust the Duchess herself oversaw, and she had discovered it 3 weeks before her death. He had, therefore, both the medical knowledge and the most compelling of motives. And yet, Inspector, I find myself troubled by one small fact, which I think you have not yet considered." "What's that, then?" "If Dr. Hartley wished to silence the Duchess before she exposed his theft, why did he not act at once, upon learning that she knew? Why wait 3 weeks, weeks in which she might, at any moment, have summoned the police, or written to the Trust's other beneficiaries, or done any number of things far more dangerous to him than a slow poisoning that any competent post-mortem might, with sufficient suspicion, have detected? No, mon ami, I think the truth is a little more complicated than a frightened doctor lashing out to save himself. I think there is a pattern here I have not yet fully perceived, and until I perceive it, I do not intend to arrest anybody at all." Chapter 11. A Daughter's Grief. Eleanor Voss received Poirot in the small sitting-room that had been her private domain for 6 years. A room of quiet, careful order, books arranged precisely, a single vase of late roses upon the writing desk, and, Poirot noted at once, a blotting pad from which a corner of paper protruded, as though a letter had been hastily concealed at the sound of his approach. "You wished to see me, M. Poirot?" "I wished, mademoiselle, to ask you about your mother." The colour left her face so completely and so suddenly that Poirot half rose from his chair, thinking she might faint. But Eleanor Voss was made of sterner material than she appeared, and she steadied herself against the desk and said, in a voice gone very quiet, "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do. I think Beatrice Wrentham was your mother, mademoiselle, not merely your employer, that some 30 years ago, before her marriage to the late Duke, she bore a child out of wedlock, a daughter, who was given for raising to a respectable family under another name, and that this daughter, grown to womanhood, found her way back into her mother's household under the guise of a companion, so that she might at last be near her, even without acknowledgement." For a long moment Eleanor said nothing at all. Then, slowly, she crossed to the desk, drew out the letter from beneath the blotting pad, and handed it to him without a word. "My dearest mother," it began, in Eleanor's careful hand, "I have waited 6 years for you to say the word aloud, and I begin to think you never will. I do not ask for the Wrentham name, nor for a place among your acknowledged family. I ask only that before one of us dies you tell me, once, plainly, without euphemism, that I am your daughter, and that you do not regret whatever choice was forced upon you 30 years ago. I have loved you in silence long enough." The letter was unfinished, undated, and would now, Poirot understood, never be completed. "I found out the truth myself 3 years ago," Eleanor said, sitting down heavily. "An old letter, from my adoptive mother's papers, after she died. A name, a date, a sum of money, paid quarterly by a solicitor in London. I made inquiries. It was not difficult, once I knew where to look, to discover that the solicitor was Mr. Gray's own father, and the source of the money, Beatrice Wrentham. I applied for the position of companion under my adoptive name. Voss was my adoptive mother's name, not my own, and she never guessed, or if she guessed, she never said. We lived 6 years in this house, mother and daughter, and never once spoke the word aloud. Did she know that you knew? I believe toward the end she suspected. She began to look at me differently, searchingly, almost tenderly, in a way she never had before. 3 weeks ago she told me she intended to alter her will. She would not say how, but she took my hand. She had never once in 6 years taken my hand, and said, "There are debts of the heart, Eleanor, quite as pressing as debts of money, and I find I have let mine run too long unpaid." I let myself believe that she meant to acknowledge me at last. Publicly or privately, I did not care which. I only wanted her to say it. And then she died, said Poirot gently, before she could say it, and before the new will could be signed. Yes. Eleanor's composure broke at last, and she wept, not loudly, but with the terrible, contained grief of a woman who had spent her whole life learning not to show her feelings, and found, now, that she could contain them no longer. You must see, Monsieur Poirot, what that means. If she died before signing the new will, then the old will stands, and I am nothing, a companion, provided for modestly and no more, as I have always been. Whoever killed her did not merely take my mother from me, they took the one chance I had of ever being acknowledged as her daughter. If I had wished her dead, and God knows there were black hours in this house when loneliness made me wish for almost anything to change, I promise you, M. Poirot, I would have wished it a month from now, after the will was signed, and never, never before. Poirot studied her for a long moment, and something in his shrewd green eyes softened, very slightly. Before Poirot could press her further, the crunch of gravel announced Inspector Reeves' approach along the garden path. His expression, that of a man who has just received news he is not entirely certain how to deliver. M. Poirot, a word, if you please. When Cynthia had withdrawn, wiping her eyes and murmuring her thanks, Reeve lowered his voice. I've had the local chemist confirm what Mrs. Whitfield suspected, tested a sample from the current bottle against the residue in an older one Miss Voss happened to have set aside, unused, some months back for spring cleaning. The concentration's near double what it should be. M. Poirot, near double. That, said Poirot, his eyes brightening with the particular satisfaction of a man watching a theory harden slowly into fact, confirms what I had already begun to suspect, though confirmation is always a pleasure, Inspector, however grim the matter it confirms. A doubling of concentration, achieved gradually across many weeks rather than in a single alteration, is not the work of panic or of a single desperate evening. It is the work of patience, mon ami, cold, deliberate, and sustained patience, of exactly the kind a frightened man might summon if he believed, rightly or wrongly, that gradual change would escape detection where sudden change could not. I believe you, mademoiselle, he said at last, turning back to where Eleanor still sat upon the bench, some little distance away, watching the exchange with evident apprehension. Your logic is sound, and grief, I find, is very difficult to counterfeit convincingly to a man who has seen a great deal of it in his time. But tell me this, and answer carefully. Did you, in your 6 years in this house, ever have occasion to visit the still room, to observe how Dr. Hartley prepared her Grace's tonic, to learn, even by accident, the particulars of dosage and preparation? Every evening, Monsieur Poirot, said Eleanor simply. I fetched that bottle myself, nearly every night for a year and a half. I knew the cabinet, the dosage, the smell of it, better than anyone in this house, save the doctor himself. I had, I suppose, every opportunity in the world to poison my own mother, slowly, across many weeks, and I swear to you, upon whatever you hold sacred, that I never once considered it, because I did not want her dead. I wanted, more than I have ever wanted anything, to be alive together with her, if only for a little while, as what we truly were. Chapter 12. The Captain's Price. If Eleanor Voss's grief struck Poirot as genuine, Captain Dennis Blackwood's composure struck him as something else entirely. The smooth, practiced composure of a man who had spent a lifetime being questioned by people he did not respect, and had long ago perfected the art of answering without truly answering at all. Beatrice and I go back a very long way, M. Poirot, he said, settling into his chair with the easy confidence of a man entirely at home in a house that was not his own. Before her marriage, before the Duke, before Edmund, before any of it, we were, one might say, very close in our salad days. Close enough, monsieur, that you continued to visit her over many years, and that, forgive my bluntness, She continued to give you money. Blackwood's smile did not falter, but something behind his eyes went cold and watchful. You've been talking to the family, I see. Yes, Beatrice was generous to me, from time to time. Old friendship has its privileges. I think, monsieur, that old friendship rarely requires quite such regular renewal. I think it more likely that you knew something of Beatrice Wrentham's past, something from your salad days together, as you so charmingly put it, that she preferred to keep concealed, and that your visits and the money that accompanied them were the price of your continued discretion. For the first time, Blackwood's urbane mask slipped, very briefly, revealing something harder beneath. That's a serious accusation, M. Poirot. It is merely an observation, monsieur, which you are welcome to correct if I have erred. Tell me, was it you, perhaps, who first knew of the child Beatrice Wrentham bore before her marriage? The daughter given away to be raised under another name? Blackwood was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its practiced charm entirely. Clever little man, aren't you? Yes, I knew. I was, there is no delicate way to say it, the child's father, M. Poirot. Beatrice and I were engaged to be married once, 30 years ago, before her family broke it off in favour of a grander match with the old Duke. I was sent abroad. The child was born after I left, and given away before I ever returned to England, and Beatrice never told me a word of it until years later, in a moment of weakness, over a great deal of brandy, and swore me to silence. And this week, said Poirot softly, she told you that Eleanor Voss, her own companion, was that very child, grown, and living beneath her roof, and unacknowledged. Blackwood's composure cracked entirely now, and something that might almost have been shame crossed his handsome, dissipated face. She told me 3 days before she died, told me she meant to acknowledge Eleanor publicly, provide for her properly in the new will, and that my usefulness to her, shall we say, was accordingly at an end. She said she was tired of secrets, M. Poirot, tired of paying for silence, and that once Eleanor was acknowledged, there would be nothing left for me to threaten her with at all, which gave you, monsieur, a very powerful motive indeed to prevent that acknowledgment from ever taking place. I did not kill her, said Blackwood, and for once there was no charm in his voice at all, only a flat, exhausted honesty. I am a parasite, monsieur. Poirot, I freely admit it. I have lived on that woman's guilt and generosity for 30 years, and I am not proud of it. But I loved her once, in my own poor fashion, and I did not kill her, and I did not know one single thing about digitalis, beyond what any man of my age knows from having a weak heart himself. Ask Colonel Ashby. I was with him in the billiard-room the whole cursed evening, save for those 10 minutes he vanished, which I noticed at the time and said nothing of, out of what I can only call old habit. An old habit, monsieur? A blackmailer's habit, Monsieur Poirot, if you want the ugly truth of it plainly stated. One learns, in my particular trade, to notice who is where, and when, and for how long. It is very often the whole of one's stock and trade. I noticed the Colonel's absence. I noticed also that Miss Voss left the drawing-room for some minutes after dinner, ostensibly to fetch the Duchess's tonic, and that Mr. Gray excused himself not long after, murmuring something about papers. I noticed a great deal that evening, out of nothing more admirable than long habit, and I have said nothing of any of it until now, because I did not think it my place to accuse people who had done me no particular wrong, whatever wrongs I may have done them over the years. That is, I think, the most honest thing you have said to me since I arrived at this house, Captain, said Poirot, and there was, for once, no irony at all in his tone. Then perhaps age is finally teaching me something, said Blackwood, with a faint, tired smile that held nothing at all of his earlier charm, though I confess I would have preferred to learn it under rather less melancholy circumstances. Chapter 13. The Doctor's Alibi Unravels. Dr. Julian Hartley had aged a decade, it seemed to Poirot, in the 3 days since the Duchess's death. His hands trembled visibly as he sat in the long gallery, and he had the hollow, sleepless look of a man who had spent his nights in silent argument with his own conscience. "I did not kill her," he said, before Poirot had asked a single question. "I know how it must appear, the embezzlement, the opportunity, the medical knowledge, but I swear to you, Monsieur Poirot, I did not. Let us begin, doctor, not with your protestations of innocence, which I have heard from every soul in this house these past 3 days, but with the tonic itself. You prepared it yourself, I understand, each fortnight." "Yes, a standard preparation of digitalis, carefully measured. The dosage was critical, given the fragility of her heart. Too little, and the irregularity would worsen. Too much, and—" He stopped. "And it would kill her," Poirot finished quietly. "Precisely as it did. Tell me, doctor, Mrs. Whitfield informs me that the tonic had grown noticeably more bitter over the final weeks of her Grace's life. Can you account for that?" Hartley's face, already pale, went paler still. No. I made no change to the dosage. I would have recorded any change. I keep meticulous records. Poirot, you may examine them yourself. The concentration should have remained precisely constant, and yet it did not. Somebody, doctor, was increasing the dosage in that bottle over a period of weeks, without your knowledge and without your authorization. Who, besides yourself, had access to the still-room cabinet where the preparation was kept? The key hangs on a hook by the kitchen door. Anyone in the household might have taken it, at almost any hour, without particular difficulty. I never thought to guard it more closely. Why would I? It never occurred to me that anyone in this house—" He broke off and buried his face in his hands. "God forgive me, I have asked myself that question every night since she died, and I cannot answer it." "Let us speak, then, of the embezzlement," said Poirot, watching him closely. "You took money from the trust, nearly £800, across 4 withdrawals, over 18 months. Mr. Gray believes this was for your sister's medical treatment. Is that the truth?" Hartley's hands fell away from his face, and something in his expression, a kind of exhausted resignation, told Poirot before he spoke that a different truth was coming. "My sister is in good health, Poirot. I invented her illness 18 months ago, when my own gambling debts— Yes, I too have that particular vice, though I have kept it rather better concealed than the Colonel— grew large enough to threaten my practice, my reputation, everything I had built in 20 years of honest work. I took the money believing I could repay it before anyone noticed. I was wrong. Beatrice found out 3 weeks ago, precisely as Gray has doubtless told you, and I have spent every night since in an agony of dread, waiting for her to expose me, to the trust, to the county, to the world. And yet you say you did not kill her. I did not need to kill her, M. Poirot." The words burst from him with sudden, raw urgency. "That is precisely the point you have not yet grasped. She told me, 3 days before she died, in this very room, that she did not intend to expose me publicly. She said scandal would harm the trust and the family name quite as much as it would harm me, and that instead she meant to require my resignation as trustee, and a schedule of repayment from my practice's income, quietly, without a word to the police or the county. I was to sign the arrangement the very morning after she died. I had every reason in the world to want her alive, M. Poirot, and rather less reason each day to fear her, once I understood how gently she meant to deal with me. Why would I murder the one woman who had just offered me mercy?" "Tell me one further thing, doctor," said Poirot, watching him closely. "In the 18 months you treated her Grace, did her condition, in your honest professional judgment, actually require any increase in dosage at all? Was there a genuine medical case to be made for a stronger preparation?" Hartley hesitated, the first true hesitation Poirot had observed in him since the interview began. Her heart was weakening, yes, slowly, as is common enough in a woman of her years. A cautious increase, properly managed and properly recorded, would not have been unreasonable at some point in her treatment. "But I made no such increase, Miss Poirot. I would have documented it most carefully had I done so. An unrecorded change to a digitalis dosage is precisely the sort of carelessness that ends a physician's career, and I have never, in 20 years of practice, been careless with a prescription. And yet, doctor, a physician who wished to disguise a deliberate poisoning as a legitimate medical necessity would find it very convenient indeed to be able to say, exactly as you have just said to me, that some increase might reasonably have been expected in the natural course of his patient's decline. It provides, does it not, a most plausible explanation, should anyone ever come to question the matter. Hartley's composure, so carefully maintained until this moment, faltered visibly. You are suggesting I planned this defence in advance. I am suggesting nothing yet, doctor, beyond the observation that your answer, however honestly meant, serves your interests rather too neatly to be entirely without significance. Poirot was silent for a long moment, turning this new information over with visible care. That, he said at last, is either the truth, doctor, or it is the most carefully constructed lie I have yet encountered in this most deceitful of houses. I confess I do not yet know which. But I will tell you this. If you speak the truth, then somebody in this house believed, or feared, that Beatrice Wrentham's mercy toward you would not extend so far, or believed that your continued presence, exposed and disgraced, would draw a scrutiny into the trust's affairs that they, for reasons of their own, could not survive. Think carefully, doctor. Who else knew of your embezzlement, besides yourself, Mr. Gray, and the Duchess? Hartley's brow furrowed in genuine confusion. No one, so far as I am aware. I told no one. Gray discovered it by accident, going through the ledgers for the annual audit. I do not believe even his clerk knew the particulars. Then, said Poirot slowly, his eyes narrowing with the particular intensity of a man who has just glimpsed, however faintly, the shape of the truth beneath the surface. We must ask ourselves a rather different question, mon ami. Not who knew of your crime, but who stood to lose the very most, should the Duchess's mercy toward you have proven, in the end, not quite so absolute as you believe it to have been. Chapter 14. The Weight of a Watch. It was a small thing, in the end, that gave Poirot the final thread of his solution, smaller even than the bitterness of a tonic or the unfinished sentence of a letter. It was a watch. He found it, or rather Inspector Reeve found it at his direction, tucked beneath the cushion of a chair in the small sitting room adjoining the Duchess's bedchamber. A gentleman's pocket watch, gold, engraved with the initials P.G., its glass face cracked as though it had fallen or been dropped in haste. Percival Gray's watch, said Reeve, turning it over in his hands. But he told us he never went near Her Grace's rooms that night, said he was in the library the entire evening, working on papers for the will signing. So he did tell us, said Poirot softly, and I confess, Inspector, that until this moment I believed him. A solicitor, after all, has very little use for digitalis, and Mr. Gray's motive, his knowledge of Dr. Hartley's embezzlement, his fear of the scandal it might bring upon a firm that has served this family 3 generations, seemed to me, always, a shade too diffuse, too indirect, to drive a man to slow and careful murder. But a watch, dropped in a lady's private sitting room on the very night of her death, is not diffuse at all. It is very direct indeed. They found Percival Gray in the estate office, and when Poirot laid the watch upon the desk before him, without a word, the solicitor's face underwent a transformation so complete and so immediate that Inspector Reeve, watching, felt for a moment almost sorry for him. I can explain, Gray said, and then, seeing Poirot's expression, seemed to understand that explanation had become, at this stage, both necessary and inevitable. I did go to her rooms that night, not to harm her. I swear to you, not to harm her. I went to beg her, one final time, to reconsider her decision regarding Julian, Dr. Hartley. I feared that whatever mercy she had promised him might yet waver, once she had slept on the matter, once the full weight of the betrayal settled upon her. 20 years, Monsieur Poirot. We three have been friends. Myself, Julian, and, in her way, Beatrice herself. I could not bear to see that friendship, that whole edifice of trust, come crashing down over £800 and a foolish man's gambling debts. And what did she say to you, monsieur, when you went to her? She was kind, said Gray, and his voice broke, very slightly, upon the word. She told me she had already decided that Julian would keep his position quietly on condition of repayment, and that I need not fear for the trust's reputation. She poured me a glass of sherry. We sat together perhaps 20 minutes, speaking of old times, of her late husband, of Edmund as a boy. It was, Poirot, one of the gentlest conversations I ever had with that formidable woman in 30 years of acquaintance. I left her sitting room a little after 10:30, in good spirits, relieved beyond measure, and it was only the next morning, dressing for what I believed would be an ordinary day, that I discovered my watch was missing. I did not dare ask for it. I did not dare admit I had been there at all, once I learned she was dead, for fear that I, of all people, would be suspected of a crime I had not committed. She was alive, then, when you left her, a little after 10:30. Alive, M. Poirot, and in the best spirits I had seen her in weeks. I would stake my life upon it. Did you see or hear anyone else upon that corridor, monsieur, either as you approached her rooms or as you departed? Gray considered carefully, as though anxious to give the fullest possible account, now that concealment had ceased to serve him. I believe I heard a door close softly, somewhere further along the corridor, as I was leaving. I did not think to look, being preoccupied with my own relief at how the conversation had gone. It might have been anyone, a housemaid finishing her turning down of the beds, perhaps, or one of the family retiring early. I am ashamed to say I paid it no particular attention at the time. A closing door, Poirot repeated softly, half to himself, at some minutes past 10:30. It is a small thing, monsieur, but I have built entire solutions upon smaller foundations than that. Poirot's eyes had gone very bright, very still. The look, Inspector Reeve had come to recognize, of a man who has just heard the final piece of a puzzle click into place. Then, monsieur, he said softly, you have given me something of very great value indeed. Not a confession of guilt, but a confirmation of innocence, both your own and, I think, of one other person in this house, whom I had begun, most reluctantly, to suspect. The Duchess was alive and at peace a little after 10:30. She was dead by 11 minutes past 11. In that narrow window of 40 minutes, mon ami, the truth of this whole sad affair lies waiting, and I believe, at last, that I know exactly where to find it. Chapter 15. Poirot sets the trap. You intend to gather them all together, said Inspector Reeve, that evening, as Poirot stood before the fire in the estate office, turning the cracked pocket watch over and over in his small, precise fingers, like something out of a novel. It is, I confess, my favoured method, said Poirot, without a trace of embarrassment. A murderer who believes himself safe is a careless creature, Inspector. A murderer confronted suddenly, in company, before witnesses who cannot be silenced or bribed or reasoned with, that is a very different matter. He will make a mistake. They very often do. And you know who it is? Truly know, not merely suspect. I believe I know, said Poirot slowly, though I confess the final proof eluded me until this very afternoon, when I asked myself a question I should have asked upon the first day of my investigation, not who had motive, for in this house, mon ami, everyone had motive, and not who had opportunity, for the still-room key hung upon a hook accessible to the whole household, but who alone possessed the particular, specialized knowledge to alter the concentration of a medicine, fortnight upon fortnight, in such small and careful increments that no one, not Mrs. Whitfield with her sharp nose for bitterness, not the local chemist, not even the doctor's own meticulous records, would notice the change until it was far, far too late to matter. That's Hartley, surely. Nobody else would know how. Precisely, Inspector. It is Dr. Hartley who prepared the tonic himself, in private, in the still room, upon each of the fortnightly occasions I have now confirmed with Mrs. Whitfield's household books. And it is Dr. Hartley who claims, quite falsely, that his records show no change in dosage across that entire period. I have examined those records myself this afternoon. They are, as he promised, meticulous, beautifully, suspiciously meticulous. Each entry identical to the last. Week after week, an unbroken record of consistency that not even the most careful physician could truly maintain across 18 months of a patient's naturally fluctuating condition. It is, Inspector, the record not of an honest man documenting reality, but of a guilty man constructing an alibi in advance, a false paper trail, prepared with exactly the same patience and exactly the same care as the poison itself. But his motive, M. Poirot, you said yourself it made no sense. She'd already forgiven him 3 days before she died. She had offered him mercy, Inspector, a repayment schedule, a quiet resignation, no scandal, no police. But consider the doctor's true position. He had already begun his slow poisoning weeks before that mercy was ever offered, weeks before he had any assurance that mercy would come at all. By the time Beatrice Wrentham took his hand and told him she would deal gently with him, the process was already set in motion, the digitalis already accumulating in her failing heart, week upon patient week. Perhaps, in that moment, he genuinely wished to stop. Perhaps he lay awake that very night, wondering whether he dared prepare an honest bottle at last. But consider further, Inspector, even with her mercy secured, his difficulty was not truly resolved. The trust is audited yearly by an independent firm. Sooner or later, mercy or no mercy, that audit would find what Mr. Gray's private examination had already found. And no promise from a living woman, however kindly meant, could guarantee that the auditors, or a future trustee, or simple ill chance, would not expose him regardless. A dead Duchess, Inspector, closes the books forever. A living one, however merciful, remains a permanent and uncontrollable risk. I think Dr. Hartley made his calculation in cold blood, weeks before her death, and found that he lacked the courage, or perhaps merely the opportunity, to reverse it once his conscience began, too late, to trouble him. Reeve let out a long breath. Then it was never really about the mercy at all. No, mon ami. It was about certainty. A frightened man does not merely want forgiveness. He wants an ending, and there is only one ending, in matters of this kind, that a guilty man may fully trust. Reeve frowned, turning the matter over. But surely, Monsieur Poirot, if he'd truly meant to kill her, wouldn't he have stopped increasing the dose once she'd offered him mercy? Why risk continuing at all, once the danger seemed past? Because, Inspector, a man who has spent 18 months constructing a slow and patient murder does not find it easy to simply arrest that process on a single evening's reassurance, however welcome. Consider also that mercy offered by a living woman is a fragile thing, dependent upon her continued goodwill, her continued silence, her continued patience with a repayment scheme that might, in practice, prove far harder to honour than to promise. I think Dr. Hartley told himself, that final night, that he would decide by morning whether to let the process run its course or to intervene at last and prepare an honest bottle. I think, in the event, he did nothing at all, and inaction, Inspector, in a matter already so far advanced, was itself a choice, and the deadliest one available to him. Poirot set down the cracked watch upon the desk and moved toward the door. Gather them all in the library at 9 o'clock this evening, Inspector. Every soul in this house, family and guest alike. I believe it is time Beatrice Wrentham's little grey secrets were spoken aloud at last, exactly as she herself intended to speak them, before somebody far crueler than I stole that privilege from her forever. Chapter 16. The Gathering in the Library. The library at Ashcombe Hall, by 9 o'clock that evening, held a company that eyed one another with the particular wariness of people who have spent 3 days discovering, one by one, that everyone around them has been keeping secrets of their own. Edmund sat beside Cynthia, his hand tight over hers. Colonel Ashby stood by the fire, jaw set. Captain Blackwood lounged near the window with studied indifference that fooled no one. Eleanor Voss sat very still and very upright in a chair near the desk, her eyes fixed upon nothing. Mr. Gray sat with his hands folded, pale as chalk. Mrs. Whitfield hovered near the door, twisting her apron, and Dr. Julian Hartley stood near the fireplace, composed, professional, betraying nothing at all beyond, perhaps, a very slight tightness about the eyes. "Mesdames, messieurs," said Poirot, standing before them with his hands clasped behind his back. "I have asked you here because Beatrice Wrentham, 4 days before her death, wrote to me of secrets within this household that troubled her deeply. In the course of my investigation, I have found those secrets, a great many of them, more than I confess I expected. For this is a house, it appears, built as much upon concealment as upon stone." He turned first to Cynthia. "Mademoiselle Marsh has concealed the truth of her father's disgrace, fearing it would cost her the man she loves." "It will not, mademoiselle. Lord Wrentham has assured me himself, this very afternoon, that nothing in your past alters his regard for you, and I think her Grace, in the end, would have forgiven a daughter of misfortune quite as readily as she forgave a son of gambling debts." Colonel Ashby stiffened, but said nothing. Colonel Ashby owed his sister money, and absented himself for 10 unaccounted minutes on the night of her death, a fact which troubled me greatly, until I confirmed, through Mrs. Whitfield's household accounts, that those 10 minutes were spent not in his sister's chamber, but in a rather more embarrassing errand, retrieving, from beneath his mattress, a stack of unpaid wagering slips he did not wish his sister's guests to discover among his belongings, should anyone chance to search his room. A foolish vanity, Colonel, but not, I think, a murder. The Colonel's ruddy face went, for once, entirely white with relief rather than guilt. "Captain Blackwood," Poirot continued, "has for 30 years extracted a quiet income from her Grace's discretion, regarding a daughter born before her marriage, a daughter I have now identified as Miss Eleanor Voss, sitting among us this evening, who is, in fact, the captain's own child as much as the Duchess's." A soft gasp ran round the room. Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap, but she did not look away. Mr. Gray has known, for some months, that his old friend Dr. Hartley had taken money that was not his own from the Wrentham Charitable Trust, and said nothing, out of a misplaced loyalty that very nearly cost him his own liberty, when his cracked pocket-watch was discovered in her Grace's private sitting-room, evidence, I first believed, of a final desperate visit to silence her. It was, in truth, nothing more sinister than an old friend's plea for mercy on another man's behalf, made and granted in perfect kindness, a little after 10:30 o'clock, when Beatrice Wrentham was very much alive and, by Mr. Gray's own account, in the best of spirits. Gray exhaled a long, shuddering breath of relief, and beside him, quite suddenly, Dr. Julian Hartley's composed professional mask flickered, very briefly, but Poirot, watching closely, saw it. Edmund rose halfway from his chair, his face working with something between anger and disbelief. "You cannot mean, Poirot, this is my mother's oldest physician. He brought me into the world as he told you himself. Surely you do not seriously propose—" "I propose nothing yet that is not built upon fact, monsieur, and I ask you to sit and to listen, for your mother deserves that her murderer be named with precision, not with haste." Poirot's voice, though quiet, carried an authority that silenced the room completely. Colonel Ashby by the fire had gone very still. Mrs. Whitfield, near the door, pressed a hand to her mouth. Only Eleanor Voss, watching the doctor with an expression Poirot found difficult to read, remained as motionless as she had been throughout the whole proceeding, as though some part of her had already, days ago, begun to suspect what the rest of the room was only now beginning to fear. "That leaves," Poirot said softly, turning at last to face the doctor directly, "only the question of who, among all these secrets, possessed both the motive and the singular medical knowledge required to poison a woman, slowly, patiently, across many weeks, increasing, fortnight by fortnight, the concentration of digitalis in a tonic bottle that only one person in this house was ever trusted to prepare." Chapter 17. The Reveal. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the room turned, slowly, disbelievingly, toward Dr. Julian Hartley, who stood very still by the fireplace, his professional composure now visibly, irreversibly cracking. "This is monstrous," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I told you, M. Poirot, she had already forgiven me. I had no reason left to wish her dead." "You had every reason, Doctor, precisely because that forgiveness came too late to matter. Consider the timeline with me, if you will, mesdames et messieurs. 3 months ago, Mr. Gray discovered the irregularities in the trust accounts and confronted his old friend privately, giving him time, mistakenly, but out of loyalty, to make restitution. It was at that moment, I believe, Doctor, that your true panic began. Not 3 weeks ago, when the Duchess herself learned the truth, but 3 months ago, when you first understood that discovery was no longer merely possible, but inevitable, a matter of when, not if." Hartley said nothing. His hands, Poirot noted, had begun to tremble. A desperate man, Doctor, does not always act at once. Sometimes he acts slowly, in small and careful increments, precisely because slowness feels safer than haste. A fraction more digitalis, with each fortnightly preparation, so gradual, so patient, that even a woman as sharp as Mrs. Whitfield noticed only a growing bitterness, never a crisis. "You began your work, I believe, shortly after Mr. Gray's confrontation, weeks before Her Grace herself ever learned of your theft, weeks before any question of mercy could possibly have entered into your calculations at all. And once begun, Doctor, such a process is not easily undone. To suddenly restore the tonic to its proper strength would itself invite the very scrutiny you sought to avoid. A change in the record, a question from Mrs. Whitfield about the altered taste, a mystery where before there had been none. You cannot prove any of this," Hartley said, but his voice had gone thin and unsteady. "Can I not, your own records, Doctor, betray you? 18 months of entries, identical week upon week, a consistency no honest physician managing a genuinely fluctuating cardiac condition could possibly maintain. It is the record of a man constructing his alibi in advance, not observing his patient's true condition. And when Her Grace at last offered you mercy, 3 days before her death, a mercy I do not for one moment doubt was sincerely meant and sincerely felt on her part, you found, I think, that mercy came too late to save either of you. The poison was already coursing through her failing heart, accumulating past the point of safe return, and even had you wished, in that final moment, to confess everything and beg her forgiveness for the far greater crime already in motion, you lacked the courage. Worse, you understood, with a physician's cold clarity, that even her generous mercy could not protect you forever. The trust is independently audited every year, Doctor. Sooner or later, mercy or no mercy, living Duchess or dead, that audit would find what Mr. Gray's private examination had already found. Only her silence, permanent and unquestionable, could make you truly, finally safe. And so you let the poison continue its work, night after night, even after mercy was offered, because mercy, Doctor, was never the certainty you required. Only death could give you that. Hartley's composure shattered completely. He sank into the nearest chair, his face buried in his hands, and when he spoke again his voice was barely audible. "I meant to stop it," he said. "God help me, when she took my hand and told me she forgave me, I meant that very night to prepare an honest bottle, to end it, to confess everything if need be, rather than carry it further. But I could not undo 18 months in a single evening, and I was afraid of what an honest bottle, after so many altered ones, might itself reveal, afraid of the audit still to come, afraid, in the end, simply of being caught, which is, I think, the truest and most contemptible fear of all. I let her take her final dose that night, knowing, M. Poirot, that her heart could not withstand very much more. I told myself it was already done, that stopping now would change nothing, that one more night could not matter when 18 months already had. I have told myself a great many comfortable lies these past 3 days. I find I can tell myself no more. Inspector Reeves stepped forward, and the formal words of arrest, when they came, seemed almost an anticlimax after the doctor's own confession, quiet, exhausted, and entirely without the drama Poirot's revelations had, until that moment, commanded. Dr. Julian Hartley left Ashcombe Hall between 2 constables, not as the respected physician who had attended 3 generations of Renthams, but as the murderer of the woman who had, in her final act of misplaced kindness, very nearly forgiven him everything. Chapter 18. The Little Grey Cells at Rest. The mist had lifted by the following morning, and Ashcombe Hall stood clear and grey and handsome beneath a pale October sun as Hercule Poirot took his leave, his single travelling case set neatly beside him upon the gravel drive, awaiting the motor car that would carry him back to London. Eleanor Voss came out to see him off, a small courtesy, but one that touched him, given all she had endured. "Mr. Grey tells me," she said, "that the new will, unsigned as it was, has no legal force, that I remain, in the eyes of the law, merely a companion, provided for modestly, as I have always been. That is the law's judgment, mademoiselle, not the world's, and certainly not mine. I understand also that Lord Rentham has expressed his intention to acknowledge you privately as his sister, provide for you generously regardless of any will's technicalities, and that Captain Blackwood, in what I am reliably informed is the first genuinely honourable act of his long and dissolute career, has surrendered any claim upon the family's continued generosity entirely, out of what he called, with some embarrassment, a debt rather older and rather more personal than money." Eleanor's eyes filled, briefly, and she looked away toward the grey stone of the house. She never said the word aloud, M. Poirot, mother, not once, in 6 years. But she meant to, mademoiselle, and meant it with her whole formidable heart. And I think, though I am merely a small and rather vain little Belgian, with no particular claim to wisdom in matters of the heart, I think that intention, so clearly and so recently formed, so nearly spoken, must surely count for something in whatever accounting truly matters, whatever the law's cold ledgers may say. He turned to survey the house once more, the long beech avenue, the mist-softened stone, the portraits within that had watched, impassive, while a household of ordinary, flawed, frightened people had concealed their ordinary, flawed, frightened secrets from one another for years, each certain their own falsehood was the darkest in the house, none of them guessing that the truest danger lay not in any one secret, but in the desperate silence with which a good man, cornered by his own weakness, had chosen to protect it. Behind him, through the open door of the hall, he could hear Colonel Ashby's booming voice, already recovering something of its old good humour, promising Cynthia Marsh that he, for one, had never doubted her for a moment. A small, generous lie, kindly meant, of exactly the harmless variety that every house, however grand, required in order to go on living with itself. Mr. Grey had already departed for London on the early train, carrying with him the melancholy business of settling the estate, and the sad private task of severing, at last, a friendship of 20 years that neither loyalty nor affection could survive intact. And somewhere within the house, Poirot knew, Captain Blackwood was making his own quiet farewells, his usefulness to the family at an end, his conscience, such as it was, perhaps a little lighter for the first honest act he had performed beneath that roof in 30 years. It struck Poirot, as it so often struck him at the close of an inquiry, that murder was rarely the beginning of a story, however dramatically it might present itself to the investigator called in after the fact. It was, far more often, merely the final and most terrible sentence of a story that had been writing itself, quietly and unremarked, for months or years before. A story of small compromises, private fears, and secrets nursed too long in solitude, until one desperate mind found no other exit from the maze of its own making. "It is curious, is it not?" Poirot said, half to himself, as the motor car at last came rolling up the drive. "How very rarely murder springs from wickedness alone. Dr. Hartley was not, I think, a wicked man, merely a weak one, who told himself one comforting lie too many, across too many patient, poisoned weeks, until the lies became a habit he could no longer break, even when mercy, freely offered, might have broken it for him. The tragedy of this house, mademoiselle, was never truly its secrets. Every house has secrets. I have yet to find one that does not. The tragedy was that Beatrice Wrentham, in the end, was prepared to forgive nearly all of them, and forgiveness, offered 3 days too late to a man already committed to his course, proved in the end no match at all for 18 months of quiet, accumulating fear. He bowed over Eleanor's hand with old-fashioned courtesy, settled his hat upon his head with the particular precision he brought to all things, and climbed into the waiting motor car. "The little grey cells, mademoiselle," he said through the open window as the car began to move, "are a wonderful instrument for uncovering what has been hidden, but I confess I have never yet discovered an instrument, however fine, capable of hurrying forgiveness along before it is too late to matter. That, I think, remains a mystery quite beyond even Hercule Poirot." And with that, the motor car carried him away down the long beech avenue, leaving Ashcombe Hall to its mist and its grief, and its slow, necessary work of healing, while behind him, the little Belgian detective already turned his thoughts, with characteristic and entirely unsentimental efficiency, toward the ordinary business of breakfast, and the case that would, in due course, come next. The end.